Hello and welcome to a Witness Special. I'm Raggy Omar. South Africa's remarkable journey from apartheid to Nelson Mandela's Rainbow Nation was one of the world's feel-good stories. But over the past decade, Mandela's promise has become mired in some of the more grim realities of South African life. AIDS, poverty, crime, corruption, and vicious infighting within the country's leading political party, the African National Congress. In the run-up to national elections in April 2009, elections which saw controversial ANC leader Jacob Zuma elected president with a comfortable majority, one of South Africa's foremost literary talents, Rian Malan, took a trip around the country. His aim was to talk to ordinary South Africans and take the temperature of the nation. And he discovered, amongst other things, that the country's best weapon may well be its ability to laugh at itself. This wry, witty and insightful film by Lloyd Ross gives us a riveting glimpse into the state of modern South Africa, the splintering rainbow.
Once upon a time, there was an explosion of light at the foot of Africa. A great man appeared, preaching reconciliation between ancient enemies and justice for all. It was a sweet dream, but it didn't last. In the 90s, South Africa developed an unenviable reputation as the world's crime capital. The rich started leaving. The poor griped about substandard housing, second-rate services, and a jobless rate of 40%. After the turn of the century, gripes grew into riots and later pogroms against foreigners. Government, meanwhile, was paralyzed by a power struggle between this man, President Thabo Mbeki, and his deputy Jacob Zuma, fired after being accused of accepting bribes. Supporters saw Zuma as the victim of a conspiracy intended to eliminate him as a potential successor to Mbeki. Trade unions and the Communist Party took Zuma's side. The drama reached a climax in December 2007 when Zuma and his leftist allies toppled Mbeki as leader of the ruling African National Congress. South Africa now faced the unsettling prospect of a man facing criminal charges stepping into the state presidency. It was against this backdrop that South Africa started preparing for its 2009 general election. You know, many foreign observers are inclined to write us off these days. In this magazine, for instance, the great Afrikaans poet and writer, Breiten Breitenbach, advises those who can to flee while there's still time. Well, I'm also a writer and also an Afrikaner, but unlike Breitenbach, I still live here. And from where I stand, things look considerably more interesting.
But Nelson Mandela, one of the greatest statesmen of our time, we've got to give up for that. He's one of the guys. I'd put him up there with Jesus and those guys. No? Okay, whatever. Nelson was our first democratically elected president. This is a great thing for the country. That's why sometimes we need to think about who we vote for. Let's not vote for people who have sex unprotectedly and then take a shower. I don't want to mention any names because I might get shot.
So yes, it's just stand-up comedy, but if you're looking for hope, this is a good place to start. You're unlikely to hear a joke like that elsewhere in Africa because most African countries have insult laws to protect politicians from that kind of mockery. South Africa, on the other hand...
So the man from Zimbabwe, nice to have you. I mean, this is like my friend from Zimbabwe. Laugh. Laugh. Laugh while you can. It's nice being in a country where there's free speech, eh?
The very existence of these young people says something about the enormous distance South Africa has moved over the past 15 years. This university was once segregated. Now, whites are a minority on a campus where everything is questioned.
We expected radical changes by now, which we really haven't seen.
What we should do as a youth is learn from our current leaders' mistakes.
I think the considerations need to be, accountability.
I'm looking at every party. I'm not just looking at race.
Apartheid is receding into memory. Old loyalties are fading, with uncomfortable consequences for the political establishment.
So I'll confront every situation as it comes.
TREVOR LEKOTA earned his nickname on the soccer field, but there was no doubting the intensity of his political commitment. In the 70s, he did 6 years as a political prisoner on Robben Island, where Mandela recruited him into the ANC. When he was freed, LEKOTA returned to the battlefield, becoming a key leader in the ANC's internal underground.
Is the people of South Africa, black and white, Indian and colored, all of them participating as equals. That is what we want.
After liberation, LEKOTA became a provincial premier and later Minister of Defense. He was one of the ANC's most revered leaders, which is why the nation was shaken by the hostile reception he received at the party's last Congress. Delegates were tired of economic policies that had created a handful of black billionaires while the poor treaded water. They wanted change. They wanted Zuma. The message here is on your bicycle. Pundits had always predicted a split in the ANC, but they thought it was the left-wing faction that would break away. They got it wrong. The centre was defeated. In the aftermath, Mbeki was unceremoniously fired, and LEKOTA found himself pondering his future.
The leadership that had taken over the African National Congress had definitely deviated from major pillars of the vision that I have learned from those who had recruited me to the movement.
Realizing their careers were finished if they stayed inside Zuma's ANC, LEKOTA and his followers broke away to form a new party, Congress of the People, or COPE. In its heady first weeks, COPE seemed to be driving South Africa towards a seismic political realignment. Some voters were surely moved by the party's message of moral regeneration, but for most, COPE's attraction was not the party of Jacob Zuma.
The ANC, they said they will do this, they will do this. All liars every day.
Jacob Zuma rose to national prominence in the late 90s when he was appointed Deputy State President. His boss, Thabo Mbeki, was once a close friend, but within months there were tensions between the two men.
That was a very, very difficult period for Mbeki. He'd won the election in 1999 by a two-thirds majority, and within 18 months he was in the most dreadful trouble as his AIDS denialism became apparent and his support for Mugabe became apparent.
I wouldn't describe that as a crisis.
There was a complete collapse in public confidence, but certainly there were people in even the ANC then who began to say, look, Mbeki's such a disaster, maybe Zuma wouldn't be worse. And I think that was fatal for Zuma, because Mbeki, of course, had spies everywhere, and he knew what was being said, and that once he thought that, Zuma could be seen as a real potential alternative, Zuma was always going to be in big trouble.
It began with the arrest of this man, Zuma's financial advisor. Shabir Sheikh was accused of soliciting bribes on Zuma's behalf. In 2003, Mbeki's chief prosecutor told the press he had a prima facie case against Zuma himself, but doubted that it was strong enough to win a conviction.
Our case, insofar as it relates to the deputy president, relies largely on circumstantial evidence.
Zuma supporters smelled a rat here. They thought Mbeki and his henchmen were attempting to convict Zuma in the court of public opinion.
You either have a winnable case based on prima facie evidence or you have nothing. So there was and there is a perception that the actions against Jacob Zuma have been politically manipulated.
When Zuma declined to retire quietly, he was dragged into court to face corruption charges involving hundreds of allegedly improper payments from his friend Shabir Sheikh. But the trial required lengthy preparation, and Zuma's popularity was growing daily. In November 2005, this young woman, the daughter of an old Zuma friend, told police Zuma had raped her. At the trial, it emerged that she had a history of laying false rape charges, and that she'd been in almost daily touch with Mbeki's intelligence service before the incident. Zuma supporters concluded that she was the bait in a honey trap intended to finish Zuma once and for all. If this was indeed the plan, it failed.
But Zuma did not emerge unscathed. He knew his accuser was HIV positive, but slept with her anyway, saying he'd taken a shower to avoid infection. This admission drew ridicule and left some wondering about Zuma's judgment.
My major problem with that is the man knew he was already in trouble. He was being investigated. There were knives out for him. For him to allow himself to fall into that trap raises a lot of questions about his sense of judgment.
Like many South Africans, KHUMALO is willing to believe that Zuma was the target of a conspiracy. Even so, many doubts remain.
But of course, Zuma himself does have a few skeletons in his closet. So some of the things that Mbeki did manage to stick.
Not so, says ANC spokesperson Jesse Duarte, who argues that criticism of Zuma is often ideologically suspect.
We have a very deep-rooted racism that threads itself through the Fourth Estate in South Africa. Even though they might have many black journalists in the newsroom, they have not been transformed.
We've been called coconuts who have internalized white values, whatever that means, because in my book I don't understand the difference between white and black values. We have human values. Some people are just bad people.